Good morning, everyone. I'm Johnny Kelley. I'm so happy to be back here at CollaborATe. I was a part of the panel review last year, and I was thoroughly impressed with last year's conference, with all of the experts that presented. I just had to come back and try to make this year's conference even better. So last year, I stated that I was like a 3-for-1 sale. I said that I used AT at home. I said that I used AT in driving to work, as well as to do my job. And I stated that AT itself is my job. But in reality, I'm more like a 4-for-1 sale, because I also routinely use AT to speak about AT. So I'd say that's a pretty good deal. So my day job is an AT technician with Chesterfield County Schools. Another technician and I handle our database administration, inventory tracking for close to 7,000 items. Resource management takes up much of our time. We manage our district membership to Boardmaker online, with I think around 100 instructors and over 500 students. We also research new supports that we can bring to bear. Much of that is new mobile apps for Chrome and iOS, and occasionally we help in trainings regarding various supports. Part-time, I'm a public speaker, and the obvious topic that is most requested, for obvious reasons, is some variation of disability awareness. I also guest lecture at numerous colleges all around the Richmond area about different topics in which I have expertise. And finally, on occasion, I get to speak to Chesterfield students about numerous topics, and my ultimate goal there is to inspire them to take their own unique lives and be the happiest version of themselves, to realize how crucial each of them is to the course of human history. So I get much satisfaction in my feeble attempts to empower the next generation. So in my day job, as we all are required, I have to work within the confines of my job description, to work within a well-established system, while still trying to do some good. In public speaking, I can somewhat flex my muscles, and rock the boat a little bit, maybe cause a few waves, ruffle just a few feathers, but still within a relatively established social framework. And that's fine. With some trial, and quite a bit of error, I've learned what can be said, and how it can be said, to conform to that framework, and still push the envelope. And for those of you who know me, or have heard me speak, you know I strongly dislike conformity, for the sake of conformity. So as a disability advocate for myself, and directly or indirectly for others, I can bring to bear all of my passion, all of my intelligence and wit, all of my fire, to advance knowledge and understanding of disability awareness and inclusion. Do we have any fans of the Incredible Hulk? Well, at my day job, I have to be Bruce Banner, the mild-mannered scientist. I have to keep my cool. I have to use mostly my intellect to make things just a little bit better. And that's good. In public speaking, though, I can let the beast peek out just a little bit. Those veins in my forehead can start popping out just a bit, and I can make people think. I can make them consider an alternative. I can inspire them to open their minds to consider new possibilities. I can touch their hearts with hope, and that's good. However, in disability advocacy, I can unleash the beast. I can turn the dial up to 11 and Hulk smash. Because I see disability advocacy a bit differently, especially when it's a person with a disability who's doing the advocating. I believe we shouldn't just be talking. We should be doing. Actions speak louder than words, right? And people respond more to actions than they do to words. So, it makes sense to me to not just tell people to treat me with respect. Makes more sense to me to live my life in a way that demands respect. Those who can evolve their interactions with me will do so without me even saying a word. And those who can't wouldn't. Even if I talk to them until I'm blue in the face. Either way, I'm not wasting anyone's time. All of this stuff, it's just fun. I'm not doing it for the sole purpose of fitting in, to prove I'm just like everybody else. I'm doing what I enjoy, regardless of whether I have a disability. I learned long ago that being an example, in doing what I love, in participating in the same struggles, the same failures, the same successes, that's a far more effective teacher than my words alone could ever be. So enough of that. Let's get down to business. This presentation has been entitled, A Life Made Possible by AT, given the focus of this type of conference, and my desire to, I don't know, maybe give you some meat to chew on. I knew I didn't want to just tell you about the AT that I use every day and show a bunch of pictures. I knew what I would want from a keynote speaker: to be inspired, yes, but to also have my knowledge expanded about the given subject. So I'm going to do my best to give you my personal viewpoint, my philosophy on AT from the perspective of a heavy user who also works in the field. Given the title, I decided to use the word possible to put forth my ideology of assistive technology. For each letter of the word, I've tried to assign a key characteristic of good AT again. This is coming from a very long-time user, and from someone who supports a wide variety of AT for an even more diverse user base. So the first, and possibly the most important characteristic of good AT, it has to be practical. Practicality, functionality, task completion. These are all terms that are absolute staples when it comes to AT. It has to help me do something. It has to enable me to be more functional with it than without it. Task completion is the name of the game. I personally can sometimes get distracted by other concerns regarding AT, whether it's my personal supports or I am recommending options to someone else. Depending on the type of support, the sheer number of options can be overwhelming. For high-tech supports, technical specifications can be daunting to consider when pricing a new support. And of course, we all know the different obstacles that are associated with obtaining the proper supports, the most obvious being funding. But when we boil all of those concerns away, or I should say, if we could boil all of that away, we would be left with a simple equation: the user plus their environment plus their task plus their tool equals task completion equals independence equals self-sufficiency equals accomplishment, and can we say sometimes equals happiness. So for each of these characteristics, I decided to give you some examples. Supports that I personally use that I believe personifies that particular characteristic. So too of my practical supports. This little screwdriver is one of my most practical supports. It has gotten me out of many a jam over the decades. I've used it to open many types of packaging, soda pop cans. I've used it to help me open Ziploc bags. I've used it as a mail opener. I've even used it as a makeshift zipper pull. I mean, the list is really endless. And the second tool is my bottle opener. I don't use this tool nearly as much as the little screwdriver, but as the name kind of sort of suggests, it helps me open bottles. And it also gives a nice lever to tightly close those same bottles. I've used it as a makeshift cup handle. And most recently, although I'm not using it here, I've used it to aid me in feeding my little 4-month-old friend. Now that's some sweet task completion right there. Next up we have O for open. This one is more geared towards high-tech supports. Mobile devices, laptops and Chromebooks, dynamic display OGCOM devices, even software, especially software, because most, if not all, high-tech supports are nothing more than circuit board-filled paperweights. So the software that govern these multi-thousand-dollar devices needs to be open-ended, enough to aid in multiple tasks. Not only that, that software should be adaptable enough to be reconfigured to perform the same task multiple ways. In my mind, and in my environment, the most obvious example would be Read-Write for Google. It's an absolute staple for us in a classroom setting. But it offers multiple supports, and multiple options for each of those supports. That allows us to have a single support package that we can configure to fulfill the individual functional needs of many different students. Unfortunately, I personally don't use Read-Write for Google. I had a problem deciding on a personal support that typified openness. Many of my supports help me complete multiple tasks. That's partially why I use those particular supports. But I finally decided on the Dynavox I'm using to speak to you. It's designed for augmentative communication, and there are many different applications offered for different communications needs. I personally use the Compass software. It's the only current software that offers the power and flexibility that I need to communicate the way I want. It's the only software that I know of that still allows the user near complete authority over the user interface and how information entered is then expressed. So those are the multiple options within a single support, communication. But if I exit the Ogcom software, I have Windows. If I slap Google Chrome on here, and I can get some work done. If I want, I can sit on my back porch, eat Cheetos, and binge watch Netflix. That's living right there, baby. Hashtag Netflix on my Dynamics. So next is simple and stable. I couldn't choose between the two, so I decided to use both. This characteristic is more focused on low-tech or no-tech supports. The zipper hook, the socket, the communication book, the battery-operated scissors, the small screwdriver, supports that aren't filled with circuit boards. And to be honest, if I can get away with using a low-tech, simple tool, that's exactly what I'll use. If I can complete a task using a tool, like my screwdriver, which has 0 moving parts. Yep. I call these solid-state tools, or SSTs. Did I just coin a new term? Either way, it has a nice ring to it, don't you think? Simple tools like brightly colored keycaps, little rubber sleeves that fit over the back of keys, makes distinguishing between different keys so much easier for those with visual impairments. My van is filled with these kinds of solid-state tools. Knob levers, pull handles, parabolic mirrors, and a phone holder that's bolted into the dashboard. Some of you are looking at me like, why in the world did you bolt a phone holder to the dash? I have spastic cerebral palsy, and with that usually comes some degree of a startle reflex, and in my case, a boatload of startle reflex. Phone holder falling from the windshield while I'm doing 70 on the highway. No, thank you. Everyone has seen these little 3-inch jelly bean switches, and you all probably know that the little covers will twist off really easy. Yeah, well, I didn't know that until one of them worked its way off, hit me in head. Yeah, that was fun. Full-on startle reflex. Luckily, my driving rehab specialist and I had practiced similar situations, so I knew how to maintain control. Still, when I got home, I had to change my pants. Everyone heard of Gorilla Glue. Yeah, those caps will never come off again. I knew someone using an Ogcom device, having a pre-programmed presentation, could still get off on a tangent. Self-imposed. For the second S, this is the first of several characteristics of good AT that is particularly important for adult users, but it should also a strong consideration with pediatric and adolescent users. We as professionals can get so excited about that new communication device for a particular potential user. We can see all the possibilities for little Johnny, all the opportunities, and all the fulfillment. If only Johnny will adopt that device as his own. If only he could see what we see, all of the doors that would open up for him, all of the self-determination that he would gain, even if he is only this tall. If we can only get him to use this awesome device, and many times he absolutely refuses to use it. Frustrating, isn't it? In reality, it's frustrating for the both of you. I can say that from experience, because I've been both sides of that frustrating fence. That potential user has no idea what that device can do for him. Sure, he hears and understands what you're saying, but it may not make sense to him. If that makes sense, if that device would help him communicate more effectively, that's awesome. Communication is definitely one of the first keys of self-determination. A lot of my friends in the rehab field told me, dude, you gotta tell this story about your hot speech therapist. Please tell me you're gonna tell them about the speech therapist. Promise me you'll tell them about that therapist you had. You must tell them. I mean, okay. But what is that? Why is your head spinning? Let me preface this story with a few facts. 4 years prior, while I was still in high school, I had received access to a Dynavox. For the time, a very, very nice piece of AT could have made my high school years much more productive, enjoyable, might have even had a girlfriend. could have helped me develop my communication skills at a much earlier age, could have changed my life if I had used it. I had access to that awesome device for 2 years, instead of it opening up a whole new world for me. It sat, collecting dust, inside a little room in the back of the school library. I don't remember having any training, but I could have figured out how to use it. That set, framework, that I truly believe in: student, environment, task, and tool. The environment part of the framework, from my point of view, doesn't just refer to the environment in which the student will use that AT. To me, it also takes into account that student's current environment, at home, at school, wherever, because that gives me an idea of that emotional, social, psychological state of mind. At that time of my life, I was not in a good place in any of those areas. I knew with every fiber of my being that I was worthless, a piece of white trash that would never be anything to anybody. Why put forth the effort to communicate equally worthless thoughts and desires? That's where I was for my whole childhood, adolescent life. The other fact that I must preface this story with is, this is not how it's done today. Our society had not become so paranoid and lawsuit crazy. But I can remember in my late teens and early 20s, I had a speech pathologist. I had moved into a rehabilitation facility called Roosevelt Institute, much like Woodrow Workforce and Rehab Center. It's the facility that our late President Franklin Roosevelt founded and received treatment for his polio. My 18 months there were, beyond all words. Anyway, I had just gotten the first Dynavox of my own, and it was obviously my speech pathologist's job to train me on the device. She was probably in her late 20s or early 30s. She was definitely a hottie. She could make a man in a wheelchair want to get up, run around the room, and then sit right back down. What made her so attractive, especially to me, besides her physical attributes, was that she was so comfortable with me. She had no problem hugging me or putting her arm on my shoulder while we programmed my Dynavox. You might think that was totally inappropriate and unprofessional, granted. But here's the thing. Back then, I wasn't the man that I am now. Today, I'll tell you straight up that I'm frigging adorable. Back then, I had absolutely no confidence in myself. I thought I was ugly, unattractive, boring, and worthless. That was ingrained in me by my family from as far back as I can remember, in numerous ways. Now, I have this gorgeous woman actually enjoying my company, so much that I would hang out with her at her house on the weekends, watch movies, grill out, and watch football. She made some mean barbecue. I like to think she knew that she could have a greater role in my life than just showing me how to use this thing. I like to think she could see my lack of self-confidence, and she knew how to, at least start, facilitating me changing that. She knew I had the intellect to use my Dynavox. That wasn't the problem. The problem was, why bother trying to communicate? No one wants to hear what I have to say. I'm nothing but a piece of white trash. And even worse, I'm a little ugly, helpless, handicapped guy. She didn't see all of that. All she saw was a nice guy, and she made a concerted effort to spend time with me. It's simply showing someone, like me, that they are indeed worthy of being heard, worthy of being considered. That therapist didn't get paid for the main impact she had on me, because it happened off the clock. It happened with a bowl of popcorn between us. It happened in her backyard listening to music, grilling steaks. It happened, talking, on my Dynavox of course, about the Bill Clinton scandal. It happened, having fun. She taught me something that I wouldn't realize until decades later, and I know this is common knowledge to everyone here. But she taught me that it's not about motivating someone to use a tool. It's about motivating them to complete a task. Once the person wants to complete a task, in my case, communicate. The process becomes more organic and maybe a bit easier. Next up is I, for individualized. This one on the surface seems pretty self-explanatory. Our department supports over 200 iPads, and usually 90 of them are routinely deployed into the schools. But we can't just send out a bunch of identical iPads. Every single one of those iPads are configured for the individual student's needs, whether it's specific applications, appropriate settings, appropriate protective cases, mounting supports, user access methods, and the list goes on. Because we know each of our students' combination of support needs are as unique as they are. We are analog beings. No two of us have ever been exactly the same throughout the whole of human history. Why would we ever think that someone who is so absolutely unique would fully function with some cookie-cut implementation of AT? It doesn't work that way, even if two people use the exact same support. This goes back to a support being open enough to accommodate the different needs of different users. Erica here uses the same digital keyboard on her mobile devices as I do. It's called the Jelly Bean keyboard. Same exact support, very different implementations. I use it because it's a familiar look and layout from previous versions of Android. It uses Google's word prediction engine, which I find very helpful. I use swipe input to type on my mobile devices, sometimes referred to as gesture typing. Swipe has been revolutionary for me and has increased my typing speed by 200–300%. And this keyboard again uses Google's version of swipe, which I've found to be by far the most accurate and intuitive, so it accommodates my old school familiarity and my lack of typing dexterity with very good word prediction and swipe technology. But Erica uses it for very different reasons. She's not real concerned with familiarity to older keyboards. She doesn't use swipe or even word prediction. I've reconfigured it to accommodate Erica's visual support needs. Larger keys, larger font size on the keys, higher visual contrast, louder audio feedback sounds, and of course, it accommodates voice typing. Now if we switched, I could probably use her setup, and she could use mine, but neither of us would be as functional. And the same would true if we both used that keyboard without customizing it, just using the default settings. Functional, yes, but not the highest function possible. And that is what I want with every implementation of AT I myself have, or I assist in. Same support, two virtually opposite implementations, accommodating two very different sets of needs. Individualization. Broadreaching. This one was quite interesting, and was quite enjoyable for me to explore in preparing for this keynote. In my cultivation of this characteristic, I ultimately discovered that it's about a comparison and contrast between functionality and longevity, and in my mind, being a tech geek, those two adjectives seem somewhat in conflict. And because I'm a geek, I like nice sensible graphs. Historically, an abundance of functionality meant a lot of moving parts working in concert. The more moving parts, the greater likelihood and frequency of malfunction, and ultimately complete failure. And in turn, the longevity of a tool, by and large, pointed to its simplicity and few, if any, moving parts. So basically, low-tech supports usually last longer than high-tech supports. But high-tech supports many times can support the user in multiple ways. A paperweight magnifier will ultimately last longer than a smartphone. They both can aid in visually supporting users, but the phone can do much more to support the user. There's ultimately a trade-off between functionality and longevity. However, high-tech supports that are properly designed for practical use can make that trade-off less drastic. And I want to re-emphasize practical use. Many high-tech supports I put my hands on, I have to chuckle sometimes, because clearly manufacturers sometimes don't consider their users in their design process. But when a manufacturer considers everyday use, heavy use, and long-term use of their high-tech support, it's a beautiful thing. You get a support that will either aid a single user for a long time, or it will aid many users over a long period of time. My tablet device is a great example of the best-case scenario. It is probably the ultimate example of multiple functionality. You name it, I can probably do it on this thing. Verbal communication, of course digital communication, reading supports, writing supports, drawing supports, visual supports, auditory supports, gaming supports, media consumption supports. I mean, there are very few tasks that I can't do with this device. It's my daily communication device. So far it's been with me for maybe 4 or 5 years now. And other than some physical signs of wear, it functions as well as when it was new. Because it's Android, which I love, it can be modified to continue to fulfill my needs for years to come. We are getting down to the last couple letters here. Low profile. This characteristic is also near and dear to me. If you know me at all, you know I value function over flash, all day long. And I want my AT supports to be as inconspicuous as possible. Of course, some supports are so big, bulky, and involved that a low-profile implementation will be a challenge. But the design of the support should never be too elaborate. Yes, I would want a new wheelchair to look nice, but I don't actually need the spinning rims. The sound system, leather upholstery, the spoiler on the back, the racing stripes down the side, none of that contributes to function. All of it would just gravitate people's attention to the wheelchair instead of the person in the wheelchair. We want the person to shine, not the AT. We want the person's thoughts to captivate and inspire, rather than the tool used to convey them. The task it enables should always surpass or outshine the AT. My steering post, about as low profile as you can get. It's just a piece of aluminum. I'm passing it around now, and I'm going to need that back, or I'm going home with somebody. But it enables me to drive a vehicle. I can't make the Steiner box screen yet, but that's huge. Being able to go where I want, when I want, and do what I want still gives me goosebumps. My van, what can I say about her? I think she is awesome. She is my baby, and every time I see her, I have to comment on how pretty she is. I love driving past mirrored glass and catching a glimpse of her rolling by. My point is that my van might not be considered low profile. How could anyone not want to look at her? People comment on her all the time. All that being said, the tasks that my van enables me to accomplish, the sheer freedom she affords me, outshines even her. It's difficult for me to say this because of how much I love my van, but the task of community navigation is more important than my van itself. The task of driving to work is more important. The task of closing my eyes, pointing at a map location, and just go explore, make memories. It's more important than the van itself. The task of coming to the rescue of my friends, being there when they need me, more important than the van. The task of driving complete strangers all over the Richmond area as a ride-share driver, more important than the van. The task it enables should always surpass or outshine the AT. And finally, economical. This is quite often a bone of contention when it comes to manufactured AT, improvised AT, whether user improvised or service provider improvised. Cost tends to be far less of a concern. My little screwdriver can be obtained at $1 store. Most of the AT in my van can be gotten at a home improvement store for under $20. But because manufactured AT is a for-profit industry, economics are many times heavily involved, assumably so, being the user of some expensive AT, and being by no means wealthy, I tend to disagree with the manufactured AT being a profit-driven industry. When I was preparing this little speech, I resisted the urge to roll up on my soapbox regarding this point. That's not why we're here. So, given the high cost of some AT as a user, that AT better be broad-reaching, right? Functionality and longevity. It better enable me to accomplish a lot of tasks. And it better do that for a very long time. I can't prevent that manufacturer from charging 20, 30 grand to enable me to express when I have to use the restroom. But I can demand that that $30,000 device function an exorbitant amount of time. And I can demand that device enable me to express any other delightful bit of information I so choose. What I'm trying to say is that I can expect value from my manufactured AT. That initial multitude of zeros on the price tag is not always a pleasant sight, but if that huge investment affords me a multitude of functions for a long time, it's a bit easier for me as the user to accept, no matter the funding sources, if I'm lucky enough to have any to petition. So the two examples for this characteristic are on opposite ends of this spectrum. Zip ties. I use them for many different tasks. The most common is for pull handles, zipper pulls. Zip ties are economical because of the initial price tag. I can get 100 for $1, again at the dollar store. They do eventually break, especially putting them through the dryer a couple hundred times. But what other support, as simple as it is, costs a single penny? The other example is my wheelchair. My $20,000 wheelchair. Huge price tag, lots of zeros. But as many of you can see, she's an old girl. This chair has been used every day since 2007, so about 11 years. My previous chair served me for 13 years through far more taxing conditions. I've had very good fortune with my chairs. That's a whole other presentation right there. But value, that's what I've gotten with these chairs. This chair I'm in, other than tires, batteries, and the odd bolt or nut that works loose, there's very little on here that isn't original parts. It just doesn't break. Now, of course, I've modified it over the years to suit my needs, and I try to be easy on it as possible, but it just keeps going without a hitch. So that huge price tag over a decade ago, I can't really complain. I've been giving a perspective of AT from an adult user, and I understand that that's a very different ball of wax than the pediatric or the adolescent user. But those users will inevitably grow up, many of which will go through the same growing pains as I have. And I think most, if not all, of these characteristics apply to those young users. Even the self-imposed characteristic, sometimes, especially with pediatric implementations, decisions are made by parents, therapists, doctors, care teams, IEP teams, in the best interest of the child. Awesome, coordinated processes to provide it appropriate AT. I've witnessed some magic over the years with different service providers, in different disciplines, and different settings, on behalf of that user. That being said, if that user is not somehow, someway, involved in that process, if that process isn't somehow self-imposed by that user, there's a real risk that that happy ending won't happen, and that fancy new device may sit collecting dust in the back of a library. It has to be about the user and what they want to do. Task motivation, not tool motivation. Right? It's our job, our privilege, to facilitate their possible. It's their journey. It's their choice as to which barriers they want to conquer. It's simply our job to offer them tools to conquer those chosen barriers. I want to thank you for coming and for listening to me.